I sat at the kitchen table, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Clara was across from me, hair still wet from her shower, and dressed in a simple t-shirt. Her beauty was effortless, even on a quiet morning like this. I watched her as she absent-mindedly stirred her cereal, her eyes lost in thought. It was moments like these that I cherished, just the two of us, the world outside feeling distant. "Margaret's been working us late into the night," Clara said suddenly, her voice cutting through the comfortable silence. "She's pushing hard for this play to be perfect, especially with the romantic scenes." I nodded, but something tugged at me. It wasn't the first time she'd been rehearsing late, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Clara's career had always been demanding, and I had always supported her, but lately something felt different. "Yeah, you've been home pretty late the past few nights," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "How's it going with Nick?" She looked up at me with a small smile, the one that usually made me melt, but this time it didn't. "Oh, you know Nick? He's great to work with, as always." There was again his name, Nick. I had never been the jealous type, at least not before now. But hearing her say his name, seeing how often she mentioned him these days, stirred something inside me. They had been acting partners for years, often playing romantic roles together. I'd always brushed it off, telling myself it was just part of the job. But now it felt different. Clara must have sensed my hesitation because she reached out and touched my hand. "David, it's just acting. You know that, right?" I squeezed her hand and nodded. "Yeah, I know. But did I? Did I really?" She leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, her lips soft and familiar. "I'll make it up to you once this show's over," she promised, her eyes sparkling with sincerity. I watched her grab her bag and head for the door, the usual swirl of mixed feelings rising inside me. Pride for how talented she was, and something darker, something I didn't want to admit. I loved her, and I trusted her. But the creeping doubt was becoming harder to ignore. As the door clicked shut behind her, I sat back, staring at my half-empty cup of coffee. When had things started feeling so distant? The theater was small, cozy even, with the kind of intimacy that made every emotion feel magnified under the stage lights. I'd sat in those seats before, watching Clara pour her heart into her roles. But now, as I imagined her rehearsing with Nick, my stomach tightened. Clara was on stage, rehearsing one of the key scenes of the play with Nick. I hadn't seen it myself, not yet, but I knew it involved a kiss. A stage kiss, sure, but still a kiss. From what Clara had told me, Margaret, their director, was pushing hard for them to make it believable. "The audience has to believe you're in love," Margaret would say, over and over. And from what I knew of Clara's dedication to her craft, she would stop at nothing to deliver. I pictured her now, standing close to Nick, her body leaning into his, their faces inches apart. The scene was about passion, about longing, and that was exactly what Margaret wanted them to convey. When Clara described rehearsals, she would always mention how exhausting it was to go over the same lines, the same actions, again and again. But she never really talked about how it felt to be in those moments with him. They must have kissed a dozen times by now. A part of me, God, I hated this part, couldn't stop thinking about how it would feel for her. Did it ever blur the lines, even just for a second? Was there ever a moment when the acting didn't feel like acting? I pushed those thoughts down, trying to focus on what she always told me. "It's just work, David." But why did it feel like more? Work was a blur. I sat at my desk, tapping mindlessly at my keyboard, pretending to be focused on the report I was supposed to finish by noon. My phone buzzed on the desk, snapping me out of my haze. It was Sophie, my best friend. She could always tell when something was up. "You good?" she asked, her voice light but concerned. Yeah, just a lot on my mind," I replied, running a hand through my hair. "You want to talk about it?" I hesitated. Sophie was great, always there for me, but I wasn't sure I wanted to dump all my insecurities on her. It felt weak somehow, but before I could stop myself, I blurted it out. "It's Clara. And Nick." There was a pause. Sophie knew all about Clara's career, knew how demanding the acting world could be, but I'd never really opened up about my worries before. "What about them?" she asked gently. "I don't know. It's just they've been spending a lot of time together. Rehearsing late, you know? And I saw this clip of them rehearsing online the other day, and I stopped, not sure if I should continue." "And?" Sophie prompted, her voice patient. "And they were kissing. On stage. But it looked real, sophomore too real. The words tasted bitter as I said them out loud. Sophie sighed softly on the other end. David, she's an actress. That's what she does. It's not real. She loves you, not him. I know, I know. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. But what if it starts to feel real for her? They're together all the time, and I'm barely around anymore. You're overthinking this, Sophie said firmly. You have to trust her. I do trust her, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure how true they were anymore. Sophie's silence spoke volumes. Look, she said after a moment, if it's bothering you that much, talk to her. But don't let your imagination run wild. It's just going to drive you crazy. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, you're right. I'll talk to her. But deep down, I wasn't sure I had the courage to ask her what I really wanted to know. Was I imagining things? Or was there really something slipping between us? That evening, I made a decision I wasn't proud of. I wanted to surprise Clara at the theater, show up unexpectedly to see her in action, maybe even take her out for a late dinner. It felt like a good idea at the time, something spontaneous to break the routine. But as I made my way to the small, dimly lit theater, my stomach churned with an anxiety I couldn't shake. When I arrived, the door to the auditorium was slightly ajar, letting in just enough sound for me to hear voices. The lights were low, the stage bathed in a soft glow, and there they were, Clara and Nick, on stage, locked in an intimate scene. I slipped quietly into the back row, out of sight, but with a perfect view. I watched as they moved closer to each other, their voices soft but intense, lines full of longing and passion. The tension between them was palpable, like something you could feel in the air. My heart pounded harder with every step they took toward one another. And then it happened. Nick cupped her face gently, and their lips met. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the kind of kiss you'd give someone when words weren't enough, when you needed to show them how much you wanted them. And God, it looked real. Too real. I froze, my mind racing. It was just a rehearsal, I kept telling myself, just acting. But as they pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just seen something I wasn't supposed to. For a split second, it didn't feel like I was watching Clara and Nick rehearse. It felt like I was watching my wife kiss another man. My throat tightened, and I could feel the heat rising in my face. I had seen Clara kiss people on stage before, but this was different. The way she looked at him afterward, the way their bodies seemed to linger close together for just a moment longer than necessary. It all felt wrong. I left the theater in a rush, barely able to breathe. As I stumbled out into the night air, the chill hit me, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside me. What the hell was I thinking? Why did I go there? Now I couldn't unsee it. The kiss, the closeness. I felt stupid, insecure, like some jealous high school kid who had just caught his girlfriend flirting with the football captain. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down at the screen. It was Clara. Clara, hey babe, just finished rehearsal. You still up for dinner? Her cheerful tone made me feel sick. How could she be so normal? I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I had just seen. Not yet. Me? Yeah, sure. Where do you want to go? I sent the text, my hands shaking, trying to act like everything was fine. But it wasn't. Nothing about this felt fine. The next morning, I woke up still haunted by what I had seen. Clara had come home late, as usual, kissed me goodnight, and fallen asleep like nothing was wrong. But for me, everything was wrong. I couldn't stop replaying that kiss in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again, Clara and Nick locked in that intimate moment. I got up before her, pacing the living room, running through 1,000 scenarios in my head. I wasn't angry at her. Not yet, at least. But I was confused, torn between trusting her and this nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something more going on. I decided to text her while she was still asleep, just to see how she would respond. Me. How was rehearsal last night? A few minutes later, she replied. Clara. Good. Margaret's really pushing us hard, but we're making progress. The romantic scenes are still tricky, but Nick and I are getting into a good rhythm. Rhythm. The word made me uneasy, like there was some unspoken connection between them that I wasn't part of. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself that I was overthinking things. This was her job, her profession. Acting was about creating illusions, right? But as the day wore on, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I needed to get out of my head, so I called Sophie. I think I messed up, I told her when she picked up. Messed up how? She asked, her voice calm but curious. I went to Clara's rehearsal last night, unannounced. I watched her kiss Nick on stage, and it looked real, sophomore really real. Sophie sighed. David, we talked about this. It's acting. You can't let it get to you. I know, but I can't shake it. It's like something fell off. The way they looked at each other afterward. The way they... Stop, Sophie interrupted. You're spiraling. You need to talk to Clara. Tell her how you're feeling. But don't jump to conclusions. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, you're right. But even as I said it, I knew that talking wasn't going to fix what I had seen. The doubt was already there, festering, growing with every passing moment. That evening, I couldn't keep it in any longer. Clara and I were sitting on the couch, watching some mindless TV show, but my mind was miles away. I hadn't told her about seeing the rehearsal, and it was eating me alive. She must have sensed something was off because she turned to me, her brow furrowed. What's going on with you lately? You've been acting strange. I hesitated for a moment, then blurted it out. I went to your rehearsal last night. Her eyes widened in surprise. You did? Why didn't you tell me? I swallowed hard, feeling my heart race. I saw you with Nick. That kiss. It looked real. Clara stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. David, it's acting. Of course it looked real. That's the whole point. Margaret would kill us if it didn't. But her laughter only made me feel worse. I wasn't laughing. This wasn't funny to me. It didn't look like acting, Clara. The way you two looked at each other afterward. She sighed, her expression shifting from amused to frustrated. David, you're being ridiculous. Nick is my friend, my colleague. We've done dozens of scenes like that together. There's nothing going on. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But the image of that kiss was burned into my brain, and no amount of rationalizing could make it go away. I trust you, I said, though the words felt hollow. But I don't know. It's been weird lately. We barely see each other, and when we do, it feels like you're a million miles away. Clara's face softened, and she reached out to take my hand. I know it's been hard, but this is just temporary. Once the play is over, things will go back to normal. I promise. I squeezed her hand, trying to take comfort in her words. But the doubt lingered, gnawing at me from the inside. The doubt had been gnawing at me for days, festering like an open wound. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that it was just acting, I couldn't let go of the image of Clara and Nick together. It haunted me. At work, in the shower, even when I tried to sleep. I hated feeling like this, like I was losing my grip on reality. That's when I did something I never thought I would do. Something that made me feel guilty just thinking about it. I hired a private investigator. I found Tom's number online after spending way too much time on websites I'd never imagined I'd be browsing. Infidelity forums, articles on catching a cheating spouse, all those places that fed into the paranoia that had taken root in my brain. I told myself it was just to give me peace of mind, to prove that I was wrong, that Clara was being faithful, and this was all in my head. But still, I couldn't shake the shame. Tom was slick, professional, the kind of guy who made you feel like he'd seen it all before. When we met at a coffee shop downtown, he barely blinked when I explained the situation. He listened quietly, taking notes, nodding at all the right moments. So, you're worried she might be cheating with this? Nick, he asked, his tone neutral, as if this was just another Tuesday for him. I don't know, I said, feeling ridiculous now that I'd said it out loud. I don't think she's actually cheating. It's just something feels off. They're spending a lot of time together, and the way they look at each other during rehearsals, it's too much. Tom scribbled something in his notepad. Okay, I'll keep it discreet. Follow her during rehearsals. Maybe after, see if anything comes up. You'll get a detailed report and any photos if necessary. I nodded, feeling sick to my stomach. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of guy who hired someone to spy on his wife. But the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away, and I knew that if I didn't do this, I'd drive myself insane with questions and what-ifs. Just be careful, I added, my voice tight. I don't want her to know. Tom smiled, that kind of reassuring smile that felt rehearsed. Don't worry, I'm a professional. A few days later, Clara invited me to a rehearsal dinner with the cast and crew. I almost said no. I wasn't sure if I could handle sitting across from Nick, pretending everything was fine while Tom was out there, watching them. But I went, maybe because a part of me wanted to see them together up close, to see if there was anything in their interactions that would confirm my suspicions. Or maybe because I didn't want to seem distant, like I was avoiding her. The restaurant was small and intimate, just like the theater. Clara and I arrived together, and the moment we walked in, Nick waved us over to a long table where the rest of the cast was already seated. He greeted Clara with a hug, one that felt a little too familiar, a little too comfortable. I watched their bodies press together briefly, my stomach nodding. I forced a smile as Clara introduced me to Nick, though I'd seen him plenty of times before. He was charming, friendly, the kind of guy who made you feel at ease even when you didn't want to be. It was impossible to hate him outright, though I wanted to. David, right? Nick said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. Clara's told me so much about you. It's great to finally meet. Yeah, you too, I muttered, trying to keep my tone neutral. I hated how this guy could look me in the eye, so casual, so confident, like there wasn't a damn thing wrong. The dinner was a blur of laughter and conversation, but all I could focus on was Clara and Nick. The way they talked, the way their eyes met when they were joking with the rest of the cast. To anyone else, it would have seemed like nothing more than two friends, but to me, it felt like there was something unspoken between them, something just below the surface. At one point, I overheard Clara and Margaret, the director, discussing the upcoming scenes. My heart sank when I heard Margaret mention more romantic scenes between Clara and Nick, including one particularly intimate moment they would rehearse the next day. I tensed up, barely able to concentrate on the rest of the conversation. Clara noticed, of course. She was perceptive like that. Later, as we were driving home, she glanced over at me, her brows knitted in concern. You've been quiet tonight. Everything okay? I forced a smile. Yeah, just a long day at work. Tired, I guess. She didn't push, but I could tell she wasn't buying it. I hated this. Hated the distance that was growing between us. Hated that I was lying to her, that I was letting my insecurities drive a wedge between us. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I had to be sure. The next day, Tom sent me a message. Got some photos from today's rehearsal. Everything's on stage so far, but I'll keep watching. Sending them over now. My heart raced as I opened the email, scrolling through the pictures. There they were, Clara and Nick on stage, running lines, going through the motions of their scene. In every photo, they were close, their faces inches apart, their bodies pressed together as they rehearsed the kiss. And it wasn't just one kiss. Tom had captured multiple moments, each one more intimate than the last. The problem was they were still on stage. It was still a part of the performance. I couldn't accuse her of anything based on these photos. Nothing was happening off stage. Tom's notes confirmed that. They hadn't met up outside of rehearsals, hadn't gone anywhere together afterward. Everything was happening in front of an audience. And yet, the photos felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind those moments, something that wasn't just acting. I stared at the images for what felt like hours, my mind spiraling with questions. What if it wasn't just acting for her? What if the lines had blurred between them, and I was just too blind to see it? That night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I had to confront her. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty as I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Clara get ready for bed. She seemed so at ease, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I need to ask you something, I said, my voice tight. Clara turned to me, her eyes wide with concern. What's wrong? I saw you. I went to the rehearsal the other night. I saw you with Nick and the kiss. Clara, it didn't look like acting. Her face went blank for a moment, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. And then, to my surprise, she laughed. Not a big laugh, but a small, incredulous chuckle. David, it's acting. You know that. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. It didn't look like acting, Clara. The way you two looked at each other. She crossed her arms, her frustration evident now. Are you serious right now? You really think there's something going on between me and Nick? I don't know. I exploded, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I don't know what to think anymore. You're spending all this time with him, and when I see you two together, it feels like, I don't know, it feels real. Clara stared at me, her mouth open in disbelief. David, this is insane. Nick is my friend, my colleague. I've told you 100 times this is just part of the job. Do you really think I'm cheating on you? I hesitated. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Her eyes flashed with hurt, and for the first time, I saw tears welling up. I can't believe you would think that about me. After everything we've been through, you don't trust me? I wanted to take it back, to tell her I was sorry, that I was just being paranoid, but the words stuck in my throat. The damage was already done. She turned away from me, her voice trembling. I can't do this right now. I watched as she walked out of the room, her footsteps heavy with frustration and pain. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed in the silence, and I was left sitting there alone, with nothing but my doubts. The house was quiet after Clara left the bedroom, but the silence was suffocating. I replayed the confrontation over and over in my head, wondering how the hell I had let things get to this point. Was I wrong? Had I misread everything? I wanted to follow her, to apologize, to take back the words, but something stopped me. Pride? Fear? I wasn't even sure anymore. Later that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, but I could hear Clara downstairs. She was talking to someone on the phone, her voice low and tight with frustration. I knew she was probably venting about me, about the argument, about how paranoid I had become. A part of me wanted to go down there and demand that she explain herself, but I stayed where I was, paralyzed by my own doubt and guilt. The next morning, Clara was distant. She moved around the house like a ghost, barely looking at me, barely speaking. I wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, but the wall between us felt thicker than ever. I didn't know how to break through it. That evening, after rehearsals, Clara didn't come straight home like she usually did. Instead, she went out with Helen, her fellow actress and one of her closest friends. I knew Helen well. She was funny, lighthearted, always cracking jokes, always the one to bring some much-needed humor to tense situations. And right now, Clara needed her more than ever. I later found out from Helen that Clara had spent most of the evening unloading everything. She told Helen about my suspicions, about how I'd hired a private investigator, something I hadn't even told Clara yet, and how our relationship felt like it was crumbling under the weight of my insecurities. Helen, being the no-nonsense type, had given Clara the advice she probably needed to hear. You need to show David how ridiculous this all is. Let him see it for himself from behind the scenes. Invite him to a rehearsal. Make him watch how staged everything really is. I wasn't there, obviously, but I could imagine Helen saying it, her tone direct and pragmatic. Clara had always been the emotional one, but Helen would make her see things clearly, without the haze of hurt feelings. While Clara was out with Helen, I was at home, spiraling. The paranoia had taken root deep inside me, and I couldn't stop myself from feeding it. I found myself pacing the living room, checking my phone every few minutes, wondering where she was, who she was with. Was she really with Helen, or was that just an excuse? I hated myself for thinking that way, but I couldn't help it. Every small detail felt like a sign, a clue, something to justify my growing suspicions. I even found myself snooping through Clara's things when she wasn't home. Her purse, her phone, though it was locked, her dresser drawers. But there was nothing. No proof. No messages from Nick, no secret calls. Just the same old things I'd always seen. And yet, the lack of evidence didn't calm me. It only made me more anxious, more desperate for answers. What if she was hiding it better than I thought? What if I just hadn't found the right thing yet? The thoughts consumed me, twisting my perception of everything. I was avoiding my friends too, even Sophie. She had tried calling me a few times, checking in, but I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to hear the same advice that I already knew deep down. Trust her. But how could I trust her when every part of me felt like something was being kept from me? Clara came home late that night. I was already in bed, pretending to sleep, even though my mind was racing. She slipped into the bedroom quietly, barely looking at me as she changed into her pajamas. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but I didn't. Instead, we lay there in silence, the space between us and the bed feeling wider than ever. A few days later, I had an unexpected run-in with Nick. Of all places, it happened at a coffee shop. I was just grabbing my usual morning cup before heading into the office when I spotted him sitting at a small table by the window, sipping his own coffee and scrolling through his phone. I almost turned around and left, but before I could make my escape, Nick looked up and saw me. He smiled and waved, motioning for me to join him. I hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly walked over. "Hey, David, how's it going?" he said, his tone friendly, casual, as if he had no idea that I was dying inside every time I thought about him and Clara together. "Good," I lied, sitting down across from him. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, my body stiff, trying to keep it together. "How's the play coming along?" "Pretty intense," Nick said, grinning. "Margaret's really pushing us hard, especially with the romantic scenes. Clara's a great partner, though, makes it easy. We've been working on getting the chemistry just right." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I had to force myself to stay calm. "Chemistry. Right. Yeah, I bet," I muttered, trying to keep my tone neutral. Nick didn't seem to notice my discomfort. He kept talking, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "It's funny, you know? It's weird sometimes, kissing someone you're not actually in love with. But that's acting, I guess. Gotta make it look real." I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding in my chest. I could barely focus on what he was saying. All I could think about was how easy it seemed for him to kiss my wife, to touch her, to play pretend in a way that felt far too real for my comfort. Nick must have sensed something, finally, because he glanced at me and frowned. "Hey, you okay? You seem, I don't know, tense." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." He nodded, oblivious. "Yeah, I get it. Work's been kicking my ass lately, too." I nodded, barely able to focus on his words. When I left the coffee shop that morning, I felt worse than ever. Seeing Nick in person, hearing him talk about the play, the kiss, the chemistry, it had all reignited the fire of doubt inside me. A few days later, my paranoia hit its peak. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see for myself what was really going on, and this time, I wasn't just going to sit in the back of the theater and quietly watch. I needed answers. I showed up at the theater again, unannounced, slipping into the back row, just like before. They were rehearsing one of the big romantic scenes that Margaret had mentioned at the dinner. From where I was sitting, it was hard to see everything clearly, but I could tell it was Clara and Nick on stage, in costume, standing close. The lighting made everything look dramatic, casting shadows that blurred the lines between reality and performance. I could see them moving toward each other, hear their voices, soft and intimate. My heart raced as I watched them embrace, their bodies pressed together in a way that felt too close for comfort. And then came the kiss. Another kiss, another long, passionate embrace that made my blood boil. My vision blurred with anger as I stood up, my body moving before my mind could catch up. I stormed down the aisle, my footsteps heavy and loud against the wooden floor. "Are you fucking kidding me?" I yelled, my voice echoing through the empty theater. Everyone froze. Clara and Nick pulled apart instantly, their faces filled with shock as they looked down at me, storming toward the stage. Margaret, standing near the front row, looked just as stunned, her mouth open in disbelief. "David!" Clara gasped, her eyes wide with panic. "What are you doing? What am I doing?" I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. "What the hell are you doing? Right here in front of everyone like it's nothing." Clara's face went pale. Nick stepped back, holding up his hands. "Whoa, man, calm down. It's just a scene." "A scene?" I barked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, sure looks like it." Clara jumped down from the stage, rushing toward me, her face filled with panic and anger. "David, stop. This is ridiculous. You're embarrassing me in front of everyone." "I'm embarrassing you?" I snapped, stepping back from her. "What about you? What about what you're doing with him?" "It's acting," Clara hissed, her voice low but fierce. "I told you this 100 times. It's just acting." But in that moment, I couldn't hear her. I couldn't see past the anger, the jealousy, the humiliation of having my worst fears seemingly confirmed in front of everyone. The theater was silent, all eyes on us, and the weight of what I had just done hit me like a freight train. Clara stood in front of me, her face flushed with a mix of anger and hurt. I could feel the eyes of the cast and crew on us, watching, judging. My chest was heaving, my fists clenched at my sides. I hadn't meant for things to go this far, but once the words were out, I couldn't take them back. Clara grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the stage. "We're not doing this here," she hissed through gritted teeth, her eyes flashing with fury. She dragged me into a side hallway, away from the others, but I could still feel their eyes burning into my back. As soon as we were out of sight, Clara rounded on me, her voice low but sharp. "What the hell is wrong with you, David? You're losing it." "I'm losing it?" I shot back, the anger still burning in my chest. "What am I supposed to think, Clara? You're up there with him, kissing him like..." "Like what?" she snapped, cutting me off. "Like an actress doing her job? This is what I've been telling you for weeks. It's a scene, David. A scene. You know that. Or at least you should." I shook my head, running my hands through my hair in frustration. "It doesn't look like just a scene to me. It looks real." Clara let out a frustrated groan, pacing in front of me, her hands on her hips. "Of course it looks real. That's the point. We're supposed to make it look real. That's acting. You're spending all your time with him," I said, my voice softer now but still laced with frustration. "You don't see how that could mess with my head? How it feels like you're slipping away from me?" Clara stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression softening just a bit. "David, I love you. You know that, right? All of this, it's just part of my work. You have to understand that." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reach out and hold her, tell her I was sorry, that I was being stupid and paranoid. But the doubts were still there, gnawing at me from the inside. "Then why do I feel like I'm losing you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Clara's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. But instead, she just sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know what else to say, David. I've tried to explain, but you're not listening. You're seeing things that aren't there, and it's hurting both of us." The anger had drained out of me now, replaced by a hollow, sinking feeling in my gut. I wanted to fix things, to make everything go back to the way it was before. But I didn't know how. "I don't want to fight," I said finally, my voice tired. I don't know how to stop feeling like this." Clara took a step closer, reaching out to touch my arm, her fingers soft against my skin. "Then come to a rehearsal. Watch from backstage. See for yourself how it's done, how choreographed everything is. Maybe then you'll understand." I hesitated, but the look in her eyes, so tired, so desperate for me to understand, made me nod. "Okay, I'll come." The theater was silent, all eyes on us, and the weight of what I had just done hit me like a freight train. Clara stood in front of me, her face flushed with a mix of anger and hurt. I could feel the eyes of the cast and crew on us, watching, judging. My chest was heaving, my fists clenched at my sides. I hadn't meant for things to go this far, but once the words were out, I couldn't take them back. Clara grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the stage. "We're not doing this here," she hissed through gritted teeth, her eyes flashing with fury. She dragged me into a side hallway, away from the others, but I could still feel their eyes burning into my back. As soon as we were out of sight, Clara rounded on me, her voice low but sharp. "What the hell is wrong with you, David? You're losing it." "I'm losing it?" I shot back, the anger still burning in my chest. "What am I supposed to think, Clara? You're up there with him, kissing him like..." "Like what?" she snapped, cutting me off. "Like an actress doing her job? This is what I've been telling you for weeks. It's a scene, David. A scene. You know that. Or at least you should." I shook my head, running my hands through my hair in frustration. "It doesn't look like just a scene to me. It looks real." Clara let out a frustrated groan, pacing in front of me, her hands on her hips. "Of course it looks real. That's the point. We're supposed to make it look real. That's acting. You're spending all your time with him," I said, my voice softer now, but still laced with frustration. "You don't see how that could mess with my head? How it feels like you're slipping away from me." Clara stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression softening just a bit. "David, I love you. You know that, right? All of this, it's just part of my work. You have to understand that." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reach out and hold her, tell her I was sorry, that I was being stupid and paranoid. But the doubts were still there, gnawing at me from the inside. "Then why do I feel like I'm losing you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Clara's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. But instead, she just sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know what else to say, David. I've tried to explain, but you're not listening. You're seeing things that aren't there, and it's hurting both of us." The anger had drained out of me now, replaced by a hollow, sinking feeling in my gut. I wanted to fix things, to make everything go back to the way it was before. But I didn't know how. "I don't want to fight," I said finally, my voice tired. I don't know how to stop feeling like this." Clara took a step closer, reaching out to touch my arm, her fingers soft against my skin. "Then come to a rehearsal. Watch from backstage. See for yourself how it's done, how choreographed everything is. Maybe then you'll understand." I hesitated, but the look in her eyes, so tired, so desperate for me to understand, made me nod. "Okay, I'll come." Opening night arrived faster than I expected. Clara had been rehearsing nonstop, and this time, I wasn't filled with the same dread or jealousy. I was proud of her, proud of the work she had put in, and I couldn't wait to see her shine on stage. I sat in the audience that night, surrounded by strangers, but my heart was racing with anticipation. I knew the scenes now, knew what to expect, but there was still a thrill in seeing it all come together, live and in the moment. When Clara and Nick took the stage, their chemistry was undeniable. The audience gasped at the intensity of their scenes, the way they moved together, the way their characters seemed so deeply in love. But this time, as I watched, I wasn't consumed with doubt or fear. I knew it was all part of the performance, an illusion crafted for the audience's sake. And when the kiss came, that same kiss that had tormented me for weeks, I watched it with new eyes. It was still convincing, still full of passion, but I knew now that it was just a role. Clara wasn't kissing Nick. She was kissing her character's lover, and it was all part of the story. Nothing more. After the final curtain fell, the audience erupted in applause. I stood, clapping loudly, my heart swelling with pride as Clara and the cast took their bows. She caught my eye from the stage, and for a brief moment, she smiled at me, a smile meant only for me. In the weeks after the play's run ended, Clara and I found our rhythm again. Things weren't perfect, no marriage ever is, but the doubts that had plagued me were gone. I had learned a hard lesson about trust, about letting my insecurities get the better of me. But I had also learned how much I loved Clara, how much she meant to me, and how easily I could have lost her if I hadn't taken a step back. Looking back, I realize now that the issue wasn't Clara or Nick or the play. The issue was me, my own fears, my own insecurities, my own inability to see that what we had was stronger than anything else. I had been so consumed with jealousy that I almost let it destroy everything we had built together. But we survived. We came out stronger. And now, as Clara's career continues to grow, I'm her biggest supporter. No longer threatened by her roles, no longer haunted by the illusion of intimacy that acting creates. I've learned to trust her, to trust us, because in the end, that's what it's all about. Trust, love, and understanding.